Hey, class, in this podcast, I want to talk about Casablanca. I want to talk about what I'm going to quiz you on next Thursday and also our class discussion. So, Casablanca was, I think I've got this right, was the most popular movie of 1943. If it wasn't the most, it was a very, very popular movie. It was an instant classic. Um, and I think it's very, very interesting. And I think it's really indicative of a very important historical kind of change in the United States. And that's the change from this feeling of U.S. isolationism, this feeling before Pearl Harbor by the overwhelming majority of Americans that the U.S. should not, and let me repeat, should not get involved in a war either in Europe against Germany or against the Japanese. So Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombing of the U.S. occurs on December 7th, 1941. The previous day, December 6th, if you took a poll of Americans, I don't think there's any question that 70 or 75% of Americans were adamantly opposed to the U.S. going to war against the Japanese or the Germans. There were very, very strong feelings of isolationism among the American public during this period. Now, Pearl Harbor changes everything. Of course, we were furious at the Japanese, enraged at the Japanese for bombing Pearl Harbor. So that was kind of a no-brainer to go to war against the Japanese. But then Hitler makes this major mistake. He had aligned himself with the Japanese, and he declares war against the U.S., which Franklin Roosevelt, who was not an isolationist, he was someone that thought Germany was dangerous and thought Japan was dangerous. He was really happy when Hitler declared war against us because it allowed him to declare war against Germany. And I'll talk about this in a lecture. So if you're a little confused about this, don't fuss about it. Let's just focus on the movie. And the big point is that before Pearl Harbor, the vast majority of Americans were against going to war, either against Germany or Japan. And Pearl Harbor changed everything. So what this movie traces, I think anyway, is the trajectory of the United States. And to my mind, or what I'm arguing here anyway, is that the Humphrey Bogart figure represents the United States, very tough, very masculine guy, a big smoker. By the way, lung cancer killed Humphrey Bogart. So he's very tough, he's very independent. The Humphrey Bogart, Rick, the Humphrey Bogart character, he's not going to get sucked in. He's on his own. He does whatever he wants. He's not going to get involved in any causes. And of course, by the end of the war, by the end of the movie, things have changed. So what I'm arguing is that Humphrey Bogart in this popular movie represents the United States, and what the American public is seeing is this transition from this isolationist stance to a stance where the U.S. becomes involved in World War II, especially the fight against Germany. And remember, it was kind of unclear why we fought Germany. I mean, it was Japan that had bombed us. So in some ways, this is a movie that's kind of reinforcing the idea that Germany is an enemy too. Now, what's interesting about this movie is it's not government propaganda. It's a movie that was made in Hollywood. It was filmed in Los Angeles. But nonetheless, I think it has a political message. And of course, the political message is embedded within what I think is a very, very entertaining set piece. Now, you may not be entertained by it. I think most students will be. It's very, very different from something you'd see on Netflix today or wherever you stream. But I think it tells a really important story for this class about the transition, symbolizing the transition of the U.S. From an isolationist nation, especially vis-a-vis the Germans, into a nation that's very much involved in the fight to defeat Hitler. Okay. And so look for those lines, look for that transition. This is what I'm going to talk about. This is what we'll talk about. This is what I'm going to quiz you on. Uh, there's another thing that I want you to watch out for in Casablanca, and I want Sam is the piano player. He's African American, and thinking about it, I'm not even sure we ever learned Sam's last name, which I think is actually important. And what I want you to look for in the character of Sam, what do you see when you see Sam? Do you see someone who is completely subservient, or do you see somebody that's got agency, who's got dignity, who can act on his own? Or I guess is it a mix? And this is interesting. It's kind of interesting, or I think more than kind of interesting, because at the very least, the character of Sam is highly dignified in this movie, whereas in most U.S. movies of the 1930s and 1940s, the portrayal of African Americans was deeply, deeply racist. They were portrayed as ignorant and lazy, and you know, these are not my beliefs. I'm sure you know that, but I'll go ahead and just have to say that. I'm just talking about the way movies portrayed African American males and really females too, very, very negative portrayals. I think Sam, at the very least, has some dignity, but I'm curious about what you think when you look at Sam. How much autonomy does he have? How much what we say agency? And this is important in the context of World War II because the U.S. needed the African American population, which is about 14%. Of all Americans were African Americans. The U.S. needed every segment, every ethnic group in the United States to support the war. The government needed African Americans as troops. The government, maybe even more important, the government needed African Americans to fight in the defense industry, to work as labor. And so suddenly during World War II, you see some progress in African American, the status of African Americans in the United States, because the U.S. government needs African Americans, needs the help of African Americans, needs the support of African Americans. And I'm just curious if looking at Sam, do you see hints of this racial progress that you see during World War II, or you may not. So keep an eye on that. The third thing, and I talked about this in class, is I just want you to note that the Muslim world, the portrayal of the Muslim world in Casablanca, it's really pervasive. And although Casablanca was shot in Hollywood, shot in California, it does very much have an international view. It's a very cosmopolitan film in that regard. Now, two other things I want to talk about before I end this podcast. I want to talk about Vichy France. Again, something I mentioned, but I want to underline it in this podcast. So, as I said before, after France was conquered, and I brought up a map on my screen, and I'll post it on Canvas. You had what was called the free zone. It really wasn't free. What the Germans did, it's blue if you're looking at the screen. What the Germans did after they conquered France was they let the French authorities administer about a third of France, the eastern portion of France, but it was under German control. And as I said in class, the reason the Germans did this is administering the day-to-day life of civilian populations is a real headache. It's very time consuming. I'm talking about like fire and police and sanitation, just kind of the day-to-day running of territories is very time consuming. And so what the Germans, they came up with a plan where they thought, well, we'll let the French do this. And the French they chose to do this were very right wing. They were very pro-German. So they didn't let anybody do it, but they let the French do it. And so that's what we call Vichy France. And Vichy France was in operation from of 1940 until November 1942. And what happened in November 1942, the Allies invaded North Africa. And after that happened, the Germans rolled into Vichy France and they administered Vichy France, and Vichy France was no more. But the key for you in watching the movie is Casablanca takes place in the context of Vichy France. It takes place while Vichy France was still in existence. And I'll show you just one more map. The last map I'm showing on the screen is a map that indicates the French-controlled territory in North Africa. You'll see French Morocco on the Atlantic Ocean. You'll see an arrow pointing at Casablanca, so you have a sense where this movie is taking place. So this area, and then Algeria was also French as well. It was controlled by the French during the period of Vichy France. The Germans allowed the French to administer the French colonies in North Africa. Again, it was the same kind of thing. Administering colonies is a pain in the neck. It's very time consuming. It calls for all kinds of specialists. It's not very romantic or anything like that. It's just kind of the day-to-day grind. So that's why the French government, the Vichy government, has so much autonomy in Casablanca. When this movie is filmed, you might wonder, well, why is it still French policemen? And again, the reason for that is Germany is letting France administer these territories, but always remember, Germany has the ultimate say and the ultimate control. So when the movie takes place, when Casablanca takes place, is during that period of Vichy France, when you have right-wing French running both territory in France and also administering the French colonial possessions in North Africa.